It all began with a book. And I've actually chosen to exclude the title of the book for a few reasons. One, I don't want that to be the focus of this post. Two, it is a very sensitive topic for some of my Latter-day Saint friends, and I don't want anyone to tune out what I'm saying just because I mention a particular book that you have strong feelings either for or against. I've come to find out that these same principles apply to many things, not just this book. In fact, it was because of another person who had been influenced by another book and some similar materials and was sharing her feelings about coming to the realization that she had been deceived that I came to realize, wow, that sounds a lot like my experience reading this book, even though my experience was dealing with a totally different topic altogether. I feel like a lot of the principles can be applied across the board. Suffice it to say, it was a very influential, masterfully written and captivating book having to do with the last days, not endorsed by the church, but written by a member from a Latter-day Saint perspective and geared towards a Latter-day Saint audience that seemed, at the time, to be very much in line with everything to do with the gospel. Back in 2015 was the first time I heard about a particular book that was becoming somewhat popular in certain Latter-day Saint circles. It was recommended to me by someone close to me who I know is very grounded in the gospel. I also knew this person was pretty good at picking up on red flags and was resolute when it comes to never deviating from correct and revealed doctrine. When I say recommended, I mean they brought it up in a conversation because they had started reading it and had found it intriguing. So, mostly out of curiosity, I also started reading it, cautiously and on the lookout for any red flags, since it wasn't necessarily a book generally known or accepted among the mainstream Latter-day Saint population, but also trying to keep an open mind. I was more than ready to throw it out the very moment it started touting anything contrary to revealed doctrine, or if it started deviating from what the scriptures and prophets have said. But what can I say? The more I read, the more I enjoyed it. In my experience, there wasn't anything that went against the things that we've been taught in the scriptures or by the prophets. In fact, immediately after reading it, I started researching into all that the scriptures and prophets and apostles have said about the last days and the second coming. And amazingly, it all seemed to line up. I couldn't find any glaring contradictions. Awake. But the big thing that got me converted, so to speak, and totally convinced that this book was inspired of God was the effect that it had on me. All of a sudden, I felt so spiritually awake, more than I had ever before. I don't know how else to describe it. It felt like I had literally been awakened from this deep sleep. It opened my eyes to my own complacency when it comes to fully engaging and living the gospel with all my heart. The second coming of Jesus Christ seems so much more real and imminent than it ever had before. Kind of like when you read a really good novel that opens your eyes to a different scenario that you hadn't considered before. I felt a greater urgency to get myself prepared, not only temporally, but spiritually. I felt a stronger desire to search the scriptures and to follow the prophet. I started living the gospel with more fervor. Surely this was a good book, and I knew it. I didn't appreciate when others would raise an eyebrow or point out red flags without even reading the book. I would sometimes even get a little defensive, or when people would make blanket assumptions about the author's intent or about it being chock full of false doctrine and going against what the prophets and apostles have taught, because that had not been my experience at all. To the contrary, I felt this book was pointing me more towards the scriptures and Latter-day Prophets, not away from them. I felt I had seen the fruits and that they were good. I felt that this book had awakened me to a higher sense of wanting to live more valiantly. No one was going to convince me that this wasn't good. I was certain it was. I was well aware of the many naysayers and their various arguments. I had read blog posts and online articles written by fellow Latter-day Saints that would point out all the things wrong with this particular book in an effort to discredit it. But I disregarded them, partly because I felt that they were often not written in the spirit of faith, hope, and charity. There often seemed to be a spirit of doubt and cynicism behind their arguments that kind of turned me off and came across to me as kind of off-the-cuff judgmental and close-minded. I also felt that many of these skeptics hadn't seriously read the book, or if they had, they did so with an already formed opinion against it. So it didn't faze me, because I knew where I stood. Caught up in the excitement, after reading the book, I ended up joining a few Facebook groups and online communities, where Latter-day Saints who had also read this book or other similar-ish books would gather to talk about it. I came to find out that there's actually a whole thriving community or cohort of Latter-day Saints who have jumped on the insert book title here bandwagon, so to speak. In certain areas or wards even, it seems that there's sometimes a higher concentration of people who are getting introduced to this kind of stuff and jumping on board and getting captivated by it. These are people who are catching the fire of excitement and feeling the urgency to get prepared. I became acquainted with some of the most faith-filled and pure-hearted Latter-day Saints I've ever met as a result of my participation in some of these groups. People I would consider truly elect, who are striving to live the gospel, fulfill their callings, live up to their covenants, and who are fully committed to following the Lord and the teachings of His restored gospel. Many of these people started to become extremely active online, often starting blogs or YouTube channels, speaking at prepper conferences, creating online trainings, etc. It's like it lit a fire in them, and they became fully engaged in this new movement. I started following many of them and vice versa. It was like we all had this big support group to validate and back each other up in what we were doing and promoting. One thing that was interesting was how in these groups, people would often refer to their being awake ever since they had read the book. And like I said earlier, I can't think of any other way to describe it. Because this book was considered kind of controversial among some of the more mainstream Latter-day Saints, many in our group were used to people telling them they were off or deceived. As a group, we considered these skeptics asleep and or uninformed, and we were a little tired of hearing about it. And so we would turn to these groups to openly talk about such things. It was like this safe space to come and discuss stuff pertaining to the last days.